Once upon a time, there was a man called Plank. Plank wasn't his real name, of course, but he was strong, plain, and not altogether too intelligent. So everyone had decided, when he was very young, that Plank was a more fitting name than his birth name, which was William. Plank lived in a town called Enclosure, and it was generally agreed upon by the residents that Enclosure was a fine place to live. There was no crime, and no war, and no feuds, and no parties, and no music or drinking, or anything else that might lead to trouble. The people of Enclosure liked their way of life to be organized, unassuming, and predictable. Surely, they would all say, life here is better than in Otherton. Nobody in Enclosure had ever been there before, but the consensus was that Otherton life was not nearly as desirable as life in Enclosure. So the people of Enclosure worked hard and slept well, smiling often, and never asking questions. Plank was a hard worker too, but he always seemed to come up short in life. Perhaps it was because his large frame scared people, or maybe it was because when he spoke, the words would come out like a beast's growl in a dark cave, or maybe it was just because folks who are all the same don't like someone who's a little different. In any case, the only job Plank could seem to hold down was one at a local grocery store, where he would spend his days pulling weeds out from the cracks in the parking lot. It didn't pay well, but while he worked, nobody bothered him, so he kept at it. In the back of his head, Plank dreamed of one day being appreciated for what he did, but he had nobody with whom to share this secret, so he didn't think on it much. Today was just like any other in the parking lot. It was summertime, and the sun was already high in the sky, making the hot air shimmer as it rose from the pavement. Plank tried to dress in as light clothing as he could, but it did little to stop the heat from bothering him. There were more weeds today. Even in the hottest weather, they seemed to always come back. No matter, just bend at the waist, pull, and put it in the bag, over and over until there was none left and the lot looked nice. But privately, Plank knew that such a time would never come. It took him a couple of days to work all across the lot, and by then, old patches of pavement had new sprouts growing from the cracks. Still, he worked on. Bend, pull, discard. He was getting to be quite good at it, and found it easy to slip into a rhythm today. It helped that so far he'd only come across tame grasses, simple, weak plants that came up by the roots easily. Then he saw it, maybe 100 feet away, standing defiantly in the mid-morning sun, was a dandelion. Its yellow flower seemed to wink at him as it swayed in the breeze, secured to the ground by what Plank knew to be an annoyingly deep root system. He sighed and decided it would be best to get rid of it now, before the heat of the day left him too tired. He walked across the lot and grabbed the dandelion as close to the ground as he could manage with his large fingers. Then, with a grunt, he pulled with all his might. "Whoa there," said the dandelion. Plank let go and fell backwards in shock. In all his days of work, he had never heard a plant talk back to him. Yet here it was, a voice as clear as anyone else's, and it seemed to be coming right from the flower he was about to pull up. Plank brushed himself off and squinted down at the dandelion. "Say that again," said Plank. A small voice sailed up from the dandelion in response. I said, "Whoa there. You weren't thinking of uprooting me, were you?" Well, that was that, Plank thought. Even though plants had never spoken to him before, this one clearly possessed the gift of language. A sense of embarrassment swept over him, which he found strange, and he decided that, since the dandelion had gone through the trouble to talk with him, he would be honest in response. "I'm sorry, little dandelion," he said, squatting next to it on the hot pavement. "It's my job to pull you up. I didn't mean anything by it." "That's all right," replied the dandelion. "In truth, I wouldn't mind leaving this place anyways. When the spring breezes came, I left my home as a seed, hoping to find adventures and a new life when I landed. It rustled its green leaves in a shrug-like manner. Instead, I found the hard pavement waiting for me. It took everything I had to find this patch of dirt, and I've been stuck here ever since." Plank was touched that the dandelion had chosen to share its story with him. Most people either didn't have time or didn't want to talk to him. So Plank was eager to continue chatting, and maybe even make a friend. "I'm sorry that you didn't end up where you wanted to be," said Plank. "Sometimes I feel like you. I didn't leave my home on a spring breeze or anything, but I grew up without a family, and sometimes I wonder if I'll be working in this parking lot for the rest of my life." He sighed and stood up. "It was nice talking with you, little Dandelion. I promise that as long as I work here, you'll get water and shade from the sun if it gets too hot." "Hey, wait," said Dandelion. "Maybe we could help each other out. If you can dig me out and put me in a nice big pot, we could travel together. I could take you back to my homeland, and maybe you could find better work there. Anything beats being out here, right?" Plank didn't know how to let the Dandelion down without sounding rude. He was a human, and humans didn't just stop what they were doing to go running off with strange plants, even if they were friendly plants. "It would be nice to see the world," said Plank, "but I don't think that I can leave right now. Imagine how the lot would get without me. Someone needs to keep it tidy." He shook his head. "I'm sorry." "How about this?" said the Dandelion. "You just put me in a pot and take me to your home. I'll be perfectly content to sit by the window and talk to you when you finish work. Then if you change your mind one day, it'll be easy for us to head out." Plank liked this suggestion, both because it meant he would have someone to talk to, and, though it made him guilty, that the lot would have one less dandelion growing in it. "That sounds good," he said. "You wait here, and I'll grab you a pot and some soil. I know the garden department always has some lying around." Plank hurried to the store, scared that in the time it took him to get the soil and pot, that someone would come along and crush the dandelion. He found a brick-colored ceramic pot that was the perfect size, and took some soil from a damaged bag in the storeroom to fill it. He didn't run into anyone on his trip, which was good, because he knew that if he had to explain himself, they would just mock him all the more. What kind of person had talks with the dandelions? Plank arrived back outside and set about trying to remove the dandelion from the pavement. It was more difficult than he expected. Usually, Plank paid no heed to damaging the plants he picked, but now he needed to ensure that none of the dandelion's delicate roots were broken in the process. Finally, after a lengthy struggle, the dandelion sat contentedly in its new pot. "Ah," it said, "much better. Thank you very much." "Any time," said Plank. "Anything for a friend." The next few days were happy ones for Plank. In the morning he would wake up and water the dandelion before going to work, and when he arrived back in his small home, the two would talk. For a plant, the dandelion asked a lot of intelligent questions, which Plank found both exciting and confusing at times. He was able to answer why his living space was so small, for example. Small paycheck, small place. But not why he hadn't ever thought of standing up for himself when people ridiculed him. And all the while, his co-workers were treating him more and more strangely at work. They whispered more as he walked past during breaks. He kept hearing words like obsolete and sad and progress. Plank didn't give much thought to these whispers, though. All his life, people had whispered about him. Sometimes they were angry, and sometimes they were scared, but they were almost never correct in predicting his future. Then one day, the store manager called him into his office at the back of the store, and Plank began to get nervous. The store manager was not the owner, but oversaw that particular outlet for the chain of supermarkets, and sometimes carried himself like a CEO. He sat behind his desk, looking at Plank with a smile that was just wide enough to appear forced, and motioned to a chair. "Please, sit," he said. Plank did so. "Plank, take a look at this for me." The manager handed a colorful advertisement across the desk. "Tell me what you think." Plank scanned the document. It was some kind of promotional offer for, wait, what? Pavement repair. No job too small, heavy discounts for first-time customers, satisfaction guaranteed, all printed in colorful, authoritative font. There was a phone number at the bottom, along with a name and some quotations from happy clients. He put the paper down. "You know where this is going, don't you, Plank?" Plank felt his stomach tighten. Then it began. "It's not that you're a hard worker, Plank. A repair of the lot here means that we can save money on weeding for years to come." He stood up, still smiling. "And you were getting slower anyways, weren't you?" "I was not," said Plank, unable to help himself. The smile faltered. "Well, that's not really the opinion that matters, is it?" Plank stared at the ground. His manager walked around the desk. "Buck up, Plank. You're a tough kid." He clapped a hand to Plank's shoulder, and nudged him towards the door. "We'll mail you your last paycheck. Then. In fact, you probably don't even need to work today. Why don't you head on home and figure things out?" The manager opened the door. "Sorry it had to be like this," he said, eyes practically vanishing behind his smile. Blank stepped outside and felt sorrow fall over him like a damp towel. That was it then. That was the only job left in town for big, stupid Plank, and now he had lost it. He began his long walk home. Dandelion was waiting for him when he arrived. "You know," it said, "I think that the indoor sunlight actually does more for me than—" It trailed off. "What's wrong?" Plank took Dandelion down from the windowsill and placed it on the table in front of him. "I think I'm ready to travel with you now, if you're up for it." Dandelion seemed to turn a more brilliant shade of yellow at these words. "Perfect," it said. "Do you need any time to get ready or say goodbye?" Plank shook his head. "I'll only need an hour to pack up," he said. "No goodbyes. I won't be missed." Dandelion could sense its friend's gloom and leaned in as close as the pot would allow. "It'll be all right. I think you'll really like my hometown. It's a ways away, but if I manage to float from there, I'm sure you can walk." "Where is it?" asked Plank. "Out east," said Dandelion, "in a place called Otherton." Otherton? The name was a familiar one to Plank, though he had been told since he was a child that there was nothing to see there. Just a bunch of people who didn't understand what being a decent, hospitable person was all about. Still, up until now, the citizens of Enclosure hadn't been all that decent or hospitable to him, so what was there to be scared of? "I've heard a lot about Otherton growing up," said Plank. "I suppose now we'll learn if the rumors are true." "You go pack," said Dandelion. "The journey isn't exactly going to be an easy one." Plank went into his room and grabbed a small red backpack that he used when he traveled. Since he would be walking, it made sense to travel lightly. Luckily, Plank did not own very many possessions, and choosing which ones to take was an easy decision. He grabbed a large water bottle that he used when he worked out in the parking lot, as well as a large towel that could double as either a blanket or a tent at night. He took a small pocket knife along with him as well, just in case he needed to use one of its many tools on his journey. He filled the remaining space with as many spare changes of clothes as he thought was sensible, slung the pack over his shoulders, and headed back to meet Dandelion. "I'm ready when you are," said Plank. "Then pick me up," said Dandelion. "The sooner we head out, the better." And so, clutching the flower pot to his chest, and with the weight of his backpack pressing into his shoulders, Plank stepped outside, closing the door to his old house and his old life. The first thing Plank noticed about traveling was that it involved a lot of walking. He'd expected this, but it took him a while to find a comfortable rhythm as he trudged along. Every now and then he would stop to take a break, drinking water from his water bottle and sharing it with Dandelion. Despite everything that had happened to him, his spirits were high. Part of it was the fact that, for the first time in his life, he felt like he was doing something meaningful, but mostly his sense of peace came from his beautiful surroundings. The people of his town took pride in not needing to travel past the border, and because of his desire to fit in, Plank had never left Enclosure himself. But seeing the land outside of town would have been worth their disapproval. Everywhere he looked, deep beds of green moss sparkled with brilliant wildflowers, some blue, some red, and some of the purest white. He was kept cool, despite the summer sun, by ancient trees, who proudly stretched their limbs into the sky, shading the ground below. He could hear wildlife, and every now and then, a bird or a small animal crossed his path, and he would smile. He tapped Dandelion's pot. "Traveling is fun," he said. It took Dandelion a moment to respond, and when it did, it was as if it had been woken from a deep sleep. It shook itself a little. "I'm glad you're enjoying yourself. To be honest, we're making very good time, and should be able to arrive in town by nightfall. Can I have some more water?" Plank obliged his friend's request, and continued onwards, not giving it a second thought. They walked on and on all day. By sunset, the landscape began to change, and the trees became smaller and grew closer together. Beds of moss were replaced by tall grasses that tickled Plank's legs as they brushed him. Finally, just as it was getting too dark to see, Plank could see lights in the distance. "Is that Otherton?" he asked. "It should be," said Dandelion. "Once we get to town, we should look into finding a place to sleep. I'm exhausted." Plank quickened his pace, even though his legs were achy from walking, and before long they were strolling the dirt streets of Otherton. As soon as he entered, Plank felt that there was something amiss. The houses were all in a row, with lights shining through the windows, and some even had smoke billowing from their chimneys, but there was no sign that there were any people living in the town. No human voices, no sounds of humans working or cooking or sleeping or walking. Plank took off his backpack and set Dandelion down on the ground to peek inside a window. Empty. He tried the next house. Lights on, nobody home. Again and again he looked into houses, only to find that every single one was deserted. Plank returned to Dandelion to relay the news. "That's a shame," said Dandelion. "I was afraid this might happen." "What do you mean?" asked Plank. "You've been told to stay away from here all your life, and there was a grain of truth in the stories that people told you. This town does some strange things with outsiders. Nothing dangerous, usually, but enough to make newcomers wary." Dandelion let its flowers sink closer into the pot. "Pick a house. We'll figure things out in the morning. I need to sleep." It was obvious that Dandelion wasn't worried about this strange turn of events, so Plank put his fears aside for now and tried to enter the nearest house. The door was unlocked, and Plank moved his belongings and Dandelion inside. The house was old and well built, with intricate molding running across the hardwood walls that looked like twisting vines. Plank ventured upstairs to find a small bed, fully made and ready to sleep in. Since it was apparent that nobody was around, he had no fear of sleeping, and as he slid beneath the warm covers, he became aware of how tired he was. "I'll figure everything out in the morning," he thought. And, after calling downstairs to say goodnight to Dandelion, Plank fell asleep. Plank awoke early the next day, and for a moment forgot where he was. Then the memories of the strange night before rushed back to him, and he jumped out of bed, eager to solve the mystery of this apparent ghost town. He ran downstairs to wake Dandelion, wondering what the new day had in store for them both. Then, as he stepped into the room, he felt the familiar grip of fear close about his stomach. Dandelion had changed in the night. Its bright yellow flower had closed up, and it stood in the pot stiffly, like a twig. Plank ran over and grabbed his friend. "Dandelion, are you all right?" There was no response. Plank began to feel panic set in. "Don't go away, Dandelion," said Plank, holding one of its greens between his fingers. "No one ever talked to me before you did. No one ever liked me but you. Please, come back." Again, Dandelion did not respond, but remained motionless, like any other dandelion. Plank slid down the wall and put his face in his hands. He was alone in a strange town. His only friend was sick, and there was nothing he could do about it. Tears formed in his eyes, and he began to cry, his desire for adventure extinguished. Then, as he sobbed, there was a knock at the door. Plank didn't know what to do, since this was not his house. He remained silent as the knocking grew louder and louder, until a voice from outside shouted, "It's all right. I know why you're here. Come on out and we can talk." Plank stood up, still sniffling, and walked over to the door to open it. A tall, elderly woman stood outside. Gray hair framed her wrinkled face, but her green eyes were bright and full of life. "Welcome, traveler. I am the mayor of Otherton. Shall we take a walk?" Plank looked back inside to where Dandelion sat on the table, unmoving and unaware. "Oh, don't worry. Your friend will be back in good time. For a while, at least." "Is Dandelion sick?" asked Plank. "Oh, no, nothing like that," said the mayor. "But your friend is at the start of a great change, as are you, I believe." She held out her hand. "My name is Violet. Come with me, and I promise it'll all sort itself out." Plank took her hand and stepped outside. Otherton looked very different in the daylight, and he was able to admire the many small, intricately crafted homes which lined the streets. He would have enjoyed the sight of it all much more if Dandelion were here to see it too. Violet walked at a leisurely, unlabored pace, and seemed not to have a care in the world. "So, what's your name, son?" "I'm Plank," said Plank. "An interesting name, Plank. I don't think I've ever heard it before." "Well, my real name is William, but nobody calls me that because I'm so big and stupid." Violet stopped and turned around and smiled. "Big? Yes, anyone can see that, but I wouldn't believe for a second that you're unintelligent." "Thanks," said Plank. Violet continued walking down the street. "Well, William, I suppose by now you've noticed that our town is a little different than what you're used to. Does it frighten you?" "Not really," said Plank, still distracted with thoughts of Dandelion. Violet rounded a corner and started down a smaller side street. As if reading his mind, she said, "I promise, you and your Dandelion friend will be able to speak again. That little flower is more important than you think. In fact, if it weren't for it, I wouldn't be paying you a visit today." "Really?" Violet stopped at the doors to a larger building. It looked like a restaurant. "Come in," she said, opening the doors. Let's talk for a bit." Plank followed her inside, and they both took a seat at a booth table with a view of the road. The table was set with a hot plate of food for two, with steaming rolls in a basket and frosted glasses of water to drink. There were no lights on that Plank could see, and the room was lit only by the early morning sunlight. "Please, feel free to help yourself," said Violet. "I'm sure you've been walking a while." Plank picked at the food, not feeling very hungry. "What you need to understand is that you found that dandelion for a reason," Violet said. "All dandelions like the one you befriended come from our town gardens. They're destined to return here eventually." "I didn't see any garden," said Plank. Violet grinned like someone about to share a secret. "You didn't see very much of our town at all, to be honest. And you won't be able to until at least this afternoon." Upon noticing Plank's confused look, she continued, "I see that I haven't done a very good job of keeping you abreast of things. Now, let me explain. The story of our town is a long one," said Violet, "but I won't bother you with unnecessary details. What you need to understand is that Otherton has existed for a very, very long time. It has always been a beacon for those who would like to leave their more oppressive townships for another opportunity. However, as time passed, the neighboring towns grew more and more angry with our way of life and philosophy. Eventually, new visitors to the town were more often looking to subjugate us than to become a part of our community. We needed a way to protect our town, but at the same time also ensure that anyone who truly wanted a change in their life would be able to find us. Do you understand so far?" Plank nodded. "Good. Because here's where things get interesting," said Violet. "You see, this is where the dandelions enter the picture. The story says that, to try to gain some measure of protection, a mayor whose name has been lost to time left town to a very far-away place, where it was said he discovered the vanishing dandelions. The mayor was able to negotiate an agreement with them, and he left the faraway land with a bunch of dandelions in tow. When he came back, he instructed all the townsfolk to take a white dandelion and scatter its seeds to the wind. The air was full of fluffy white seeds, and when everything had cleared, all of the townsfolk disappeared from view. In fact, the whole town had vanished, leaving only this empty shell that we're currently inside. Otherton was now safe from all those who desired to see it harmed, but there still remained the need for people to be able to enter, if they truly wanted to. The old mayor had planned for this as well. You see, when the dandelion seeds were released, they flew through the air, designed to seek out and call to those who were dissatisfied with their lives in one way or another. The dandelions would then lead these unhappy souls to our town, so that they too could scatter a vanishing dandelion to the wind and join our community, safe from the outside world." "But how does someone leave the town once they've vanished?" asked Plank. "To undo the vanishing, one need only take a mature dandelion from our garden and release its seeds. Then that person is once again a part of the outside world, while the seeds go forth to call others to our town. It really is a nice system, if I do say so myself. Plank nodded, mulling everything over. So, where does Dandelion fit into all of this? Why is it all closed up? Your friend started a metamorphosis once it began to draw near to our border. It is closed up now, but will emerge fully mature and ready for you to become a part of this community. But that means, said Plank, your friend has grown old, yes. Its time on this earth is drawing to a close. But I wouldn't despair. It has fulfilled its own purpose in life, and what's more, it knew from the start that this would happen. Your friendship did no harm to its son. Don't worry. Plank could understand what Violet had told him, but he could not keep himself from feeling sad, knowing that now his time with Dandelion would need to end soon. He stood up. I would like to go back and see if Dandelion is done changing. I want us to be able to talk again, he said. I think that's a fine idea, said Violet. By the time we arrive back, your friend should be in a much more chatty mood than when we left. They walked back outside, not talking very much at all as they did so. So, how much did she tell you? Asked Dandelion, as Plank opened the door. Its flower had reopened, but now its yellow petals were replaced by a great tuft of white, fuzzy seeds. Plank noticed that its voice had changed as well. I don't want you to go, said Plank. So she told you everything, said Dandelion. I wish that I could stay with you, Plank. I love talking with you and traveling alongside you in this wonderful pot you gave to me, but I've always known my life cycle would be a short one. I've done what I wanted to in life, and now it's time for my seeds to return home, so that one day they'll be able to leave and sprout and make new friends. And die, said Plank. Yes, and die. But that is not something which can be avoided, not by me, or you, or Violet. At least my passing will allow you to experience something more. With the new voice came a new personality, apparently, as Dandelion's usual lightheartedness had been replaced by a more measured, calm demeanor. How much time is left? Asked Plank. Not very much at all, I'm afraid, said Dandelion. My seeds will start to fall on their own soon, and if you don't help to scatter them, then you will not be able to enter Otherton, and this whole adventure will have been a waste. Plank nodded. I just don't want to lose my friend, he said. Changes in life are never easy, said Violet, even if they are changes for the better. You belong here with us, William. This Dandelion would never have met you had that not been the case. Come on, said Dandelion. Take me outside. It's time for you to be welcomed into the town. And, with a heavy heart, Plank understood that there was no turning back. He picked up Dandelion's pot and slowly stepped outside, Violet following closely behind. So how does it happen? Asked Plank. It's a simple enough process, replied Dandelion. Just pull me up and use your breath to scatter my seeds. I'll handle the rest. I don't want to hurt you. You don't need to worry about that. In this stage, I can feel no pain. I'm going to miss you, Dandelion. And that's all right, my friend. Hurry now, though. It's best not to put off what you cannot avoid. And, feeling like he would never find another friend who he could talk to, Plank uprooted the Dandelion and blew. The seeds flew into the air and remained suspended, as if frozen in time. Then they began to glide towards Plank and encircle him, slowly at first, but soon went faster and faster, until it became impossible to focus on any one individual seed. Plank felt sweat form on his brow, and he grew dizzy as his motion blurred. He fell to the ground and was aware of a faraway voice sounding in his ears. You were my first friend too, you know, it said. Then there was nothing but darkness. Plank awoke from his slumber and looked around. He was unsure how much time had passed, but the sun was still shining in the sky, so it could not have been very much. He was lying on the ground, and all around him he could hear footsteps and laughter and human voices. Everything that had been missing from Otherton when he arrived. He opened his eyes, looked around, and gasped. What was once a ghost town now appeared in front of him as a bustling, living city. Merchants pushed carts selling flowers and other wares, looking tired, but happy. Children danced in the street to the rhythm of a man playing drums on the sidewalk, while parents tapped their feet, enjoying the spectacle. People smiled for no good reason. The aromas of all kinds of food, savory and fresh, floated through the air, and Plank found himself breathing deeply as he took it all in. Sparks of life, everything that enclosure had stamped out, lived here with an untethered enthusiasm. Plank stood up and walked outside the main square, where things were a little bit more quiet, in order to collect himself. Then he saw it. A single white dandelion seed remained suspended in the air at the start of a small side street, bobbing up and down like it was floating on a wavy sea. Plank approached, and the seed drifted away from him, farther down the street. Plank tried to catch up, but the seed just flew faster, turning down street after street, away from the town towards the border. Finally it stopped, and as Plank rounded the corner, his mouth fell open. Standing before him, in a beautifully terraced landscape, stretched a garden containing thousands and thousands of golden dandelions. The seed wafted towards the front of the garden and settled into a patch of unclaimed earth. "Don't worry," called one of the dandelions. "We'll make sure this one grows up nice and tall for you. I'll bet when it sprouts up, it'll be thrilled to hear what its parent was like. Welcome to Otherton." Plank walked towards the garden and knelt down where the seed had landed. He turned to the dandelion who had addressed him and smiled, feeling that, finally, he had a place to call home. The end. I hope you enjoyed the story. Have a good night. Bye-bye.